There is a jar sitting somewhere in the Sinai desert 3,000 years ago, and by morning, it is crawling with worms. A man was told something simple: gather only what you need for today. Nothing more, nothing hidden, nothing saved for tomorrow he wasn't promised control over. But he couldn't do it. In the dark, before anyone was watching, he scraped a little extra into a fold of cloth and buried it under his tent, in case God forgot him by morning. And when the sun rose, what he was hiding to protect himself had turned into exactly what he feared most: nothing. Rot. Waste. A smell he couldn't explain to his own children. Moses wasn't angry about a broken rule. He was looking at a man's open heart, and what he saw underneath the fabric of obedience was a fist, closed, white-knuckled, gripping tomorrow so hard he couldn't feel today. You have that same fist. I have it too. It doesn't look like desert sand and rotting bread anymore, but it behaves exactly the same way, quietly, underneath everything you call responsibility. Maybe yours isn't manna. Maybe it's the inbox you check at midnight because rest feels like falling behind everyone else who never stops. Maybe it's the calendar you can't bear to leave empty because an unscheduled hour feels less like peace and more like exposure. Maybe it's the way your chest tightens the second nothing is planned, like stillness itself is a threat waiting to happen. That tension has a name, and it isn't laziness, and it isn't discipline. It is the oldest tell in Scripture for what a person actually believes about whether they will be taken care of when their hands are empty. Here's what almost nobody tells you. The ancient Sabbath was never primarily about rest. Rest was only the visible symptom. The real design underneath it was a weekly interrogation of your grip. One day, every 7, where you were commanded to open your hand completely and watch what happens when you stop securing your own future for 24 hours straight. And your body already knows exactly what that costs, whether you've ever thought about it or not. Under real or imagined scarcity, the nervous system doesn't wait for permission. It floods itself with stress chemistry, narrows your focus down to the nearest threat, and quietly convinces you that stopping is the same thing as starving. That response kept ancient people alive through famine and war. It was never designed for a Tuesday afternoon with a full refrigerator and a paycheck already on its way. Somewhere along the road from the wilderness to right now, so many of us started living every ordinary day like it was still the desert, gripping things that were never actually as scarce as they felt. Notice something about a closed fist that most people never stop to consider. A hand clenched shut cannot hold a hand offered back to it. It cannot receive a gift, a blessing, or help extended by someone else. It can only continue clutching what it already has, growing more tired with every hour it refuses to relax. That's the quiet cruelty of the grip. It doesn't just fail to protect you. It actively blocks the very provision you're terrified of losing, because both hands are already full of your own effort, leaving no room for anything to be placed inside them by someone stronger than you. So watch what happens next in the story, because this is exactly where it stops being ancient history and starts becoming uncomfortably personal. God tells them, on the 6th day, gather twice as much as usual, not because the rule suddenly changed, because he was proving something to people who had spent generations as slaves, learning that nothing was ever given, everything had to be seized, hoarded, fought for. The provision was never actually the problem in that story. The trust was. And here's the part that should unsettle you a little, because it wasn't just about food. In the ancient world, a sign wasn't decoration, it was legal proof. When a king made a covenant with a smaller nation, both sides kept something visible: a seal, a treaty stone, a mark that couldn't be faked, proving publicly which king that nation actually served the moment no soldiers were standing guard. Loyalty that only shows up during inspection isn't loyalty at all. It's performance wearing loyalty's clothing. And the Sabbath was built on that exact same architecture. Not a rule to obey when it happened to be convenient. A weekly, visible declaration of which kingdom you actually belong to, proven not by what you said out loud on a Sabbath morning, but by what your hands were still doing on the one day you were told plainly to let go. That's the part that stings if you're honest with yourself for even a minute, Because most of us have never actually tested whether we trust God. We've simply never stopped moving long enough to find out. We call the constant motion responsibility. We call the refusal to rest hard work and quietly admire it in ourselves. But strip away the language we use to make it sound noble, and what's underneath is often the exact same thing that rotted in that man's tent 3,000 years ago: fear. Wearing the costume of diligence so well that even we can't tell the difference anymore. Think for a moment about what your closed fist is actually protecting. Every hour you can't unclench without guilt. Every plan you refuse to release, even when it's clearly time. Every quiet, just in case, running in the background of your life like a second job nobody hired you for. It was never really about the task itself. It was always about who you secretly believe is holding the outcome when your hands stop moving. A hand that stays completely full of your own effort has no room left to receive anything that's actually being given to it. That's not a poetic image for ancient Israel wandering through sand. That's a mirror, and it's pointed directly at this week of your life. And here is the moment that changes everything if you're willing to let it. The command was never rest because you finally earned a break. It was rest and discover that you were never the one keeping yourself alive in the first place. The Sabbath doesn't ask you to prove you're strong enough to stop. It asks you to admit, out loud if necessary, that you were never actually the one holding it all together to begin with. That admission, not the nap, not the day off, not the silenced phone, that admission is the real rest the whole command was pointing toward all along. Every generation faces the same wilderness test. It just wears different clothing depending on the century. Yours might not be a literal desert. It might be a bank account you refuse to check because checking feels like losing the last thread of control you have left. It might be a relationship you manage like a project instead of trusting like a gift. It might be a body you keep pushing past every warning sign instead of finally listening to it. The wilderness simply moved indoors. The manna changed shape into deadlines and notifications and 5-year plans. But the fist never changed at all. Consider for a moment what it actually looked like for that same generation to finally get it right. Scripture doesn't hide the failure, but it also doesn't stop there. Later, that same people learned to gather exactly enough, trust the double portion, and rest without checking under the tent flap in the middle of the night. Nothing about their circumstances changed. The wilderness was still the wilderness. What changed was the grip. It's worth sitting with what an open hand can actually hold that a closed one never could. Rain doesn't collect in a fist, it runs off, wasted, refused. It only gathers in a palm turned upward, unguarded, willing to hold whatever falls without demanding to control the amount or the timing. That's not weakness. That's the only posture capable of receiving more than it could have taken by force. Every person who has ever genuinely rested in God's provision first had to stop trying to catch the rain their own way. So here's the question worth sitting with tonight, long after this video ends and the room goes quiet again. If you opened your hand completely, work, worry, the compulsion to secure every possible outcome yourself before you'll allow yourself to breathe, what would actually happen? Not in theory, not in some hypothetical, safe version of your life. In your real week this week, would something genuinely collapse? Or would you finally discover what was true the entire time, and you were simply too busy gripping to notice? That the provision was never dependent on the grip in the first place. The open hand always looks empty right before it looks full. That's the part faith consistently requires and control never can offer you, no matter how tightly you hold on. And the strange mercy hidden inside all of this is simple. You don't need a literal desert to find out which one you actually are. You don't need worms in a jar or a wilderness sunrise. You just need one day. One honest, uncomfortable, deliberately unscheduled day, where your hands stay open long enough for you to finally see who's really been catching what falls. Because the sign was never really for God to see. He already knows exactly what's in your heart before you do. The sign was always for you, the quiet, undeniable moment you finally see, resting in your own open palm, exactly who you've been trusting the whole time.